Video as a call to action for developers because I am looking to implement a new technology in the field of blockchain and privacy systems, and there are a lot of there are a lot of different fields which have to come together in order to make this happen. So I want to make this appeal. If you're a developer, if you specialize in any of the fields I'm about to list, I encourage you to listen to what I am about to say and to consider joining consider joining me as we build this new technology. Um, Essentially, we are attempting to develop a new operating system which operates in a cross-device, fully decentralized, and fully encrypted manner, which protects privacy. So if you are a developer specializing in cryptography, specializing in blockchain, or and this is a big one, especially if you specialize in lower level systems design, so things like C or assembler or the implementation of virtual machine software which can support a running operating system, implementing Linux drivers, implementing sort of device drivers or hardware interfaces. Essentially, what we're trying to implement is a version of a file system. And if you go back to perhaps the 1960s, the original file systems, you didn't really have file systems. You had a disk, and on that disk it was literally you just had your sectors, and you would literally just put the files on the disk. There was no file system. And so if you think about what a blockchain is and what it can be, we're bringing it kind of back and treating it as though it is one of those disks. And so what we want to implement is the ability to execute read and write operations to and from a blockchain, and to utilize the blockchain as if it were simply this blank disk, sort of like an unpartitioned block device, inside of what we now know as the Linux environments and things. So really, the implementation of an entire operating system, including a file system on top of that. But if you specialize in Linux driver development, in virtual machine software, or Linux programming, or those lower level languages like assembler, and maybe even C, we're going to need a lot of that in order to implement this. Now, I want to get into what is trying to be built because I think that's an important step. Essentially, a blockchain can be used as a storage ledger. It can store very small amounts of data. So we can use it for storing things like files, folders, and some pointers to some more voluminous data. So obviously we don't want to store every version of every file on the blockchain. That would be that would of course cause a lot of bloat, and it would be not ideal. But what we can do is store the hash of every file on a blockchain or inside of a blockchain-like data structure. So what I'm proposing is the development of an operating system which is capable of booting up based on the hashes pointed to and the sort of directory servers or hosting, the image hosting servers that'll host these files. Those are registered with the blockchain, and the hashes themselves are put on the blockchain. And then I'm proposing that we can essentially encrypt all of this data in such a way that only authorized clients can pull down their specific file system or their specific operating system sort of configuration. And from there, we can implement an entire operating system, including user space programs that operate on the blockchain. Now, I just talked about essentially what would be possible is having an encrypted file system which contains folders and things like that. And essentially we just use op returns on the blockchain or something similar, and we're able to implement something of that sort. The other piece is that it's possible to have unencrypted things, and you can just literally, so suppose you wanted to post a website or post, you wanted to host a program or host a public directory that anybody could read from or read and write to. Just get rid of the encryption, and you have the ability to store data on, not on the blockchain, but you store the hashes on the blockchain and you host data somewhere and you put on the blockchain, here's the hash and here's where it's being hosted, you can pull it down. And essentially that allows for a blockchain-backed file system. And so what I want to build on top of that is a standard architecture for programs, because this is the 21st century and I think it's time that we agree on an architecture that is going to run in a virtual environment, of course, in a virtual operating system, but across all devices. And that's kind of what WebAssembly is trying to do. You can get a lot of things to compile down to WebAssembly nowadays, and my proposal is that we attempt to implement a virtual operating system inside of WebAssembly, which has a file system driver that utilizes the blockchain for encrypted storage. And it also, the virtual machine which implements this is of course accessible across all your devices, so that way you have your documents, your contacts, everything like that, accessible across all of your devices. And then from there, what I propose is that we're now in this virtual environment. We can code up some extensions to the virtual machine implemented as hardware devices, so the same way as a USB interface or an NIC is implemented as a hardware device on the physical layer or in the physical environment. For the virtual environment, we implement these things that are accessible via hardware standard drivers in the virtual environment, such as an authentication API that permits access to a specific set of cryptographic keys, which are managed, of course, entirely on the blockchain. And that can permit for users for the first time to have custody over an asymmetric key pair for themselves. And we can then use that to, for example, get it endorsed by certificate authorities, which attest to the validity of somebody's identity in the real world, or things of that nature. And of course, the added benefit of now I can know somebody's public key and actually send them a message and be reasonably certain that it's going to get where it needs to go eventually. In terms of the information, the sort of information disclosure aspect, meaning nobody else is going to get to it except for the person who is the intended recipient. So things like that can benefit privacy. There's a lot more. I have a paper written up. If you're interested, if you want to learn more, I'll keep this pretty short, but this is kind of my proposal. Send me an email and I will get back to you. I'm trying to build a team around this, so if you're an interested developer or if you're an investor, I do have some funding to put into this, and I'm also in talks with some people. But if you're interested, send me an email, ty@tyweb.us. So that's ty@tyweb.us. Send me an email and let's talk about this, because I really think that because of the blockchain, we can begin to put a lot of things, we can begin to sort of allow for some things which were envisioned around the 1990s that haven't been possible before. I believe we can make those into reality if we put in some work and get some of these new things built. So send me an email to ty@tyweb.us if you're an interested developer or investor into something like this technology. I look forward to hearing from you. And I'll throw out one more thing before I end this. I'll throw out one more thing, and that is, not only can we have folders and files and things put on the blockchain, but if we can agree on a standard architecture such as WebAssembly and some standard systems level APIs or hardware level APIs, either way, for an operating system, we can actually put programs into those shared folders. And if they're public, then the output of those programs, or the programs themselves, can interact with the ledger and perform different things or do different things based on the current state of the ledger, therefore essentially allowing for interactivity. People can build applications, publish them, and then have public auditability. So you can publicly audit the output of any program, or even just package up your HTML, CSS, and JavaScript from a website, throw it into a blockchain shared folder, and then you'd be able to access that website in a fully sort of decentralized way. And then, of course, the JavaScript could, for example, implement some blockchain centric or some blockchain centric functionality into a decentralized sort of application, sort of as a hybrid. But anyways, that's kind of what I want to implement. Send me an email if you're interested, and I look forward to hearing from you. Thank you.